Oh, cool.
There you go. And let me share my screen here so that we can see the presentation.
Can see it.
This is called Open Process Automation and the Future of Process and Batch Automation. I'm Walt Boyes. I'm a Life Fellow of ISA and a Fellow of the Institute for Measurement and Control in the UK. And in fact, I'm a former president of the Seattle section. So many years ago that we drove on stone tires and wore water buffalo hats. What we're going to talk about today is the future. And the future, as always, isn't quite gelled yet. The magic 8-ball says come back next year most of the time. We'll take questions, but we'll do it at the end if that's all right. You can post them in chat or wait until the end of the talk. Meanwhile, Open Process Automation began as a project at ExxonMobil nearly 20 years ago. It actually started when Exxon got really angry at their chief DCS supplier. If you know who that is, that's great. If you don't, I'm not going to throw mud. And they decided to look at having a new open architecture developed so that they weren't in thrall to a single company and a single monolithic architecture structure. Meanwhile, in 2008, Apple created something really new. They created the App Store, and they released a fairly open software developers kit and a reasonably open API. So most any software engineer could create apps that ran on any Apple phone and later on iPads and later on Macs. And interestingly enough, it took about 6 months for the first automation app to appear in the App Store. It just didn't take long. And that was a really good thing because it foreshadowed what seems to be the future of software in the automation space. And meanwhile, in 2010, a company called Inductive Automation released its SCADA product, Ignition, which has, again, a semi-open API and a third-party SDK. And Ignition was designed to be user customizable. Steve Hechtman, the founder of Inductive Automation, was a big fan of Apple, and he picked up on the value of what Apple created with the App Store. And meanwhile, Ignition was designed to be user customizable. Here's some third-party apps that you can buy that are add-in apps. They are not written by Inductive Automation. There's one written by a Seattle company called Seek, which is a great database management company. There's time series databases, Canary Labs Historian. There's several of those. There's even a PIDBot, which makes PID loops. So some very powerful apps have been created by over 150 creators, including people that you'd never expect, like Bristol Myers Squibb, who created a specific app for something that they were doing in a pharmaceuticals lab, and they realized they could probably sell it. And so I think the last I heard it was selling for about $2,000. as this app that you can use as part of Ignition. In about 2010, I was a member of the Smart Manufacturing Leadership Coalition, which is now called SEASME. And about 2010, I proposed that SMLC consider developing app-based software and an architecture applicable to all industrial automation systems. This, I thought, would be real interesting. And it worked great until all of the people who were representing the main automation vendors got up and left. And I don't think they were too happy. Neither was everybody else. And Exxon was certainly not happy. So Exxon turned the project over to the Open Group in 2017 after a feasibility study that was done by Lockheed Martin. Now, this is weird, I grant you. Why they had an aerospace company do a feasibility study for an open automation architecture, I continue to fail to understand. What happened is Lockheed came back and said, well, here's the thing. The way that it works in aerospace is you have to get the Department of Defense to agree, and if they don't agree, then you don't have a software product. And a bunch of us explained to them that it doesn't work that way in process or batch automation. There are many cooks and many pots, and the Department of Defense doesn't have control. Neither does any other department, for that matter. And at one meeting, I turned to Ed Bartusiak, who was the head of the Open Group at the time and had been chief instrument engineer at Exxon. And I said, okay, Ed, what are you going to do when Honeywell and Emerson et al. Say no? And he didn't have an answer for me. And so I'm kind of still asking that question, and it's been 6 or 7 years now. The Open Group began the Open Process Automation Forum, which began to establish a standard. And meanwhile, the project moved on. We should, however, remember the great Andrew S. Tannenbaum, who said, the nice thing about standards is that you have so many to choose from. And furthermore, if you do not like any of them, you can just wait for next year's model. So they persevered, and some of the smaller, more independent companies decided to join in. And in 2019, they issued the standard V1.0. It had an architecture, it had consistent security, it had device and component profiles that could be interchanged. It had a connectivity framework, which was based primarily on OPC UA. And it had a systems management section so that people could understand how everything was supposed to fit together. It's sort of like the picture of a 1,000-piece puzzle. Sooner or later, you find the right pieces, and sooner or later it fits. It was a great step away from monolithic software into real app-based functionality. By 2019, they were able to create interchangeable function blocks that would work in nearly anybody's software. This was cool stuff, and it's still cool stuff. In 2021 and 2022, the standard version 2 and 2.1 were released. All the features in version 1, and there's more. You have a reference architecture now. with improvements. You have an information model with improvements. And more than anything else, voila, you have a certification program so that your apps can be certified to work with the Open Process Automation Standard. This is just about everything that they need to start using the thing. And in 2023, OPAS version 3.0 was released, and test beds were established by Exxon, Shell, Georgia Pacific, Schneider, and Saudi Aramco are doing a joint one, Dow Chemical, and Reliance Industries, among others. You'll notice that aside from Schneider, and in a few minutes you'll see Yokogawa, the major automation vendors are simply not playing. I'm not sure what it's going to do, but the fact is it works. The results have been extremely good. But like every standard, there's another one. And in 2023, Profibus International introduced, and I mean really last week at Hanover Fair, they introduced a new standard of their own, which is called Modular Type Package. And it's based on Namur's open architecture standard, which isn't quite the same as the Open Process Automation Standard. But you can see from the picture the idea of how it works. Each one of these assemblies is like a puzzle piece, and it fits together and it plugs and it operates. And these are this is exactly the sort of thing that I suggested in 2010 to the Smart Manufacturing Leadership Coalition. And I'm delighted to see that it's actually working. BASF appears to be doing a test bed, and most of Europe, because it's Namur, most of Europe appears to be adopting it. It's a really robust, standardized interfaces. The equipment assemblies don't have to simply be one device. You can have an entire assembly. For example, you can see in the picture there, there's a reactor with a pressure transmitter at the bottom and a mixer at the top, and that is all one assembly. And that can all be plugged and played through OPCUA. So they're not trying to do anything really unusual that we haven't been able to do for months or maybe even years, but they are doing it. And this is very cool. Ureason, a company in the Netherlands, has started making apps of their own. The one thing that they would like to see is an app store. And aside from Phoenix Contact and a small store that has very few apps in it, and the Inductive Automation App Store, nobody's done it yet. Some people are looking for early adopters, and here's one. Ureason has a thing they call a control valve app. And the way it works is it's an AI engine. You give it a very small amount of data from each control valve, and it will predict the remaining useful life of the valve. It's really cool. They have another one doing the same thing for pump health monitoring. It's built into PLC Next, however, and so you have to use a Phoenix Contact controller to use that app. But individual companies are beginning to produce these apps, and this is going to be really cool. It's going to be very, very nice when we see more people than UReason starting to do it, and more people are. There's a group called the COPA, the Coalition for Open Process Automation, and they've got a little group of people, including Yokogawa. Remember, I said that we'd talk about Yokogawa fairly soon. Codesys, Wood Group, the huge system integrator, SMAR from Brazil, Stahl from Germany, and a company called Supermicro, which makes advanced single board computers that they're building all this stuff on. And you can see how it works. The OPAS connectivity framework is built at the center of this thing. And the distributed control nodes are here. The 4 to 20 milliamp IO comes in here. There's a gateway here to another DCS or PLC. And the advanced computing platform has all these virtual machines, which act like very much like apps. And so things are, again, moving forward. Remember, though, I asked Ed Bartusiak what would happen when Honeywell, Emerson, ABB, and the rest of them said no. Well, Yokogawa is a strong contributor here, and Schneider is too, but nearly everybody else is turning up their nose at open process automation. What they say is that it will never work. Of course, it won't ever work if they won't let it. But it's one of those things, you know. So what's it all mean? What it means is there is a huge demand for automation systems, whether SCADA or distributed control, and the line between SCADA and DCS is very, very blurry right now. If you take a look at what inductive automation calls SCADA, really and truly, it's a distributed control system with all the other stuff that you get from a distributed control system. So what's going to happen? I don't know. The magic 8 ball is cloudy, but what we've got here is a real opportunity for a revolution in the way that monolithic software systems are designed and made. Many people have to buy a complete DCS package to get the one or two things that they really, really need. And they don't want to do that. They really don't want to do that. So what they're looking at is being able to pick and choose from integrated apps and put them together like a puzzle, so that they have the ability to start with state-of-the-art equipment and state-of-the-art software. And they don't have to buy crummy 2-bit software, because that's what the monolithic company sells. Some of the big companies have very nice pieces in their software. And if they could be encouraged to break that stuff apart, that would be really, really good. And what we've got, I think, is a real revolution in the way controls are made. We've got a much, much more computer and software aware population. As younger people come into automation, they don't want to spend their whole day in 1984 or 1994 or 2000 for that matter. They want stuff that they can use, and they are all used to working with apps in the Google Play Store or in the Apple App Store. They know what they are. They know how to do it. Many of them have written them. So what they want is a backbone that people can hook these things on. So hopefully that's what open process automation is going to do. In whichever, whether you buy the Namur version or the open process automation foundation version, or you buy the one from the consortium. You should, because they all want to work with this same standard, you should be able to make it all work. We hope. Remember all the fun we've had with wireless standards and with Ethernet standards and with field bus and all that fun? We may have it here too. But what I suspect is going to happen is people are just going to go around it. The IIoT, the Industrial Internet of Things, is designed to take things and connect them to other things on the edge of an entire network. And that sure sounds like a SCADA system to me. And I think it might very well. So before I take questions, you ought to read the bio. I'm a principal with Spitzer and Boys. I'm a life fellow of ISA. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Measurement and Control. I am a chartered measurement and control technologist in the UK. And I'm a member of the Association of Professional Futurists. From 2003 to 2013, I was the editor-in-chief of Control magazine. From 2014, I've been editor and publisher of the Industrial Automation and Process Control Insider, which is due to come out probably Saturday. And I also, in my copious spare time, I write and edit science fiction, fantasy, and alternate history. And occasionally I sleep. So that's me. And we can, I'm sure you guys have some questions. So I'm gonna open it up. Yes, we are recording it, and I'll send it to Brian, and he can send it out for everybody. Anybody want to start by asking me questions, or have I put you all to sleep?
I think we're awake. That was quite a presentation. I'm sort of stunned, actually.
Well, Exxon is still pretty mad at the red one. And they would like very much to be able to, at some point, pull all that stuff out of their refineries and sell it to somebody else. And the only way they're going to do that is if OPAS actually works.
Right. Are there any competing standards? I'm working on ISA 112, which is a SCADA standard.
Well, that's probably going to either be married to or interfere with OPAS. Supposedly, ISA is very much in favor of OPAS. Then, of course, there's OPA, which is the German version from Namur, which is kind of like the difference between ISA 100 and wireless HART. And it's not clear yet whether OPA or OPAS is going to win. The real issue right now is there are very few companies who are making devices that are OPAS or OPA compatible. And until you get those devices, you're looking at, y'all remember Heart 6? Heart 6 never went anywhere because Emerson refused to make devices that would handle Heart 6. Heart 6 wound up being Heart 7, which is also called wireless heart. And they finally got that out, but it was 5 years late. And the way they got it out was to wrap a wireless shell around it. The Field Bus Foundation has had problems with interconnectivity and interoperability. And so there's I don't think it's going to work. Frankly, I think what we're going to see is people like inductive automation getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They've broken the $100 million barrier now, which is pretty good for a little software company. And no, they're not for sale. I call them up every 3 months and ask. And if they ever tell me that they are, I'll put together a whole bunch of people and we'll buy it. But we see a ton of people like Ureason, for example. That control valve app, I am told, is selling like crazy. And it's a standalone app. One app per control valve. And they charge something ridiculous like €8 a month per valve. Maintenance departments can take collections to pay for that. And it tells them highly accurately the remaining useful life of the valve. I've never seen anything like it. I think it's really cool. Their pump motor app is not quite as good because it's stuck to the Phoenix Contact controller. I've asked them if they're going to break that out, and they went, well, maybe, we'll see. So I'm expecting that they will. This is a really critical time for this stuff, but I think that we're finally going to win because young people are starting to come into automation, and they don't want to use desktop computers with 3 36-inch screens. They want to be able to do all this stuff on their phone. And here's the other thing, and this is really important. Every single one of the major software vendors has bugs reported almost on a weekly basis. And if you write an app, it's simple. You can bulletproof it, and it's very, very difficult to find your way into one. It's highly unusual. So if we move to apps, this is a really good thing for security. The problem is right now, there isn't an app store for industrial automation apps. The pieces are out there, like OPAS has their certification program now. But you get your thing certified, and then you got to find someplace to put it where you can sell it. And just selling it on your own website is pretty silly. So I'm really heartened by what we're seeing, because I've wanted this for 15 years now, ever since I first saw an iPhone. I got an iPhone and I went, holy, look at that. This is cool. I wonder why we couldn't do that for automation systems. And sure enough, there are some tries out there. Inductive automation has got it almost perfect. The big problem is that they're not open enough. You have to be really part of their vendor ecosystem to be able to be part of it. If they were to open their app store up to OPAS and let OPAS sell apps on Inductive Automation's app store, that'd be pretty cool. But I don't know if that's going to happen yet. Like I said, the Magic 8 Ball says, come back next year. So questions. Come on, you guys, don't make me work.
Basically, I have some.
Oh, hi, Ed.
Yeah. I have some experience in the Saudi Aramco aspect. They were locked in pretty much with Vincis.
Yeah.
I think it was, and I don't know, and Vincis kind of went away. I don't know what.
Well, it became Schneider Electric.
Schneider Electric, that's where it appeared. Okay, that's why Schneider's so big with this PI with, that's something I didn't know. I'm out of date on that. So
and Schneider and Yokogawa are really the only two of the major automation companies that are making serious investments in OPAS or OPA or COPA or any of the three almost identical standards that are developing.
Well, it's behooves Yokogawa. They've been trying to get in for a long time. They tried to get into Aramco many years ago, and I also know that they did some projects over in Qatar. So they've been on the periphery in the Middle East, but the other established, when you get a bureaucracy or an organization that kind of almost standardizes on one or maybe possibly three vendors, they're not going to want to expand it much to include a Yokogawa. Although I also worked on projects, ABB, there's three in Royal Commission. The first two facilities were ABB. The third one ended up being Schneider. So that carries over at least in Saudi Arabia, but I don't know about all the competitors to ExxonMobil around the globe, so I can't tell you. I do know from experience, I just joke a little bit, but to convert, people converted analog control systems. They 4 800 megawatt units. They went to an ABB DCS systems, and then also I've worked in the oil and gas business, and they're at great expense. Sometimes they will replace one vendor's DCS with another, and that's very cumbersome. I mean, even the architecture of their hardware, their cabinets, and it's more than just the software. The software is the high level thing, and that, but how it's managed and it's implemented in the hardware all the way down to where the I/O comes in from the cables in the field. It's a big problem, and everybody knows it, but I think everybody's trying to hold on to their piece. I don't know what the growth rate is for facilities that require, and that's not one thing you may not have access to, but what's the growth rate for each one of these companies?
The big companies are doing quite well according to my stock portfolio.
Oh.
Since I'm not giving stock advice, I can own the shares in Honeywell and Emerson and ABB and so forth and so on, and I do. The problem, and that's the problem, Ed, they're making enough money so they don't have to change. And I believe that what we have here is a tipping function. At some point, they're going to run along just fine. And then nobody's going to buy anything, and it'll go doop. And I really think that's what's going to happen. And we aren't going to know when it does, except 6 months later, we'll go, whoa, what happened there?
Yeah.
The people who are running these companies are getting older. The people who are operating the operating companies are getting younger. Not a lot yet, but it's coming. And as the tech companies start laying off engineers, boy, there's probably 10,000 Amazon engineers that are looking for work right now. So if you need any engineering, you can probably pick it up pretty cheap. And not that I want that to happen to anybody, but you know, and the same thing is true with Microsoft. Microsoft, interestingly enough, just laid off all of their Internet of Things evangelists and all of their industrial automation evangelists. They laid them all off. They closed the division down. That tells me that something's not right with the way that we're doing this. And yes, I agree that it's more than software. But if you could go to a device that is connected through a marshalling box into a DCS and just put a controller on that device and have it interface with the rest of the plant wirelessly, eventually you could pack all that old DCS stuff up and put it away. I'm sorry, my office assistant decided that the next door neighbor was in their yard. Sorry about that, but we'll see what happens. I think that I think there's a change coming. I have been predicting this for long enough that people may think I'm nuts, but I really think it's possible.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Other questions?
That's part of it. Oh, I have a secondary thing. I don't know if you know the history or if anybody in this group knows the history, but they made a big push to go from the analog controls, and then they decided to put all the DCS on PC boards and programming. And all the different vendors agreed to compete. At least they all went at a similar amount of time. I don't know what the impetus was or the driver for it was, but they all decided to go to that next step and digitize basically their control systems. And I don't know the history of that or what drove it. And I guess I could throw out that that's really, if you were going to do something like this, you need to know the history of that and how that was accomplished, and whether or not it would be feasible to do something like that again. And
it was accomplished like the mating of elephants. There was lots of stamping and bellowing, and it took years for the baby to be born, because they had the same stuff back then. Remember, there were two competing analog standards, 0 to 20 milliamps and 4 to 20 milliamps, not to mention 3 to 15 PSI in a pneumatic standard. And they were all trying to use those the same way. Tannenbaum that's my favorite quote about standards, because Tannenbaum is so accurate. He's just right on. You just pick your own standard and go with it. And why we went to digital control is because analog control got too unwieldy. And everybody was moving from analog computing to digital computing because the rest of the world drove it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened, man. Everybody that knew anything about analog controls, that workforce, that expertise was dwindling, and you had the creation of this huge computerized digital expertise, and it was a good fit to proceed and do that. But I'm surprised that I know Microsoft was in IoT, and they decided to back out of it. They had a big push on it. It's been for years they were in there, but they just weren't able to get it to move because there's not a real strong leader. I guess what the problem is, it's a bunch of equals, and nobody has the market share and the number of the customers to go along with it.
I think that's probably part of it. AT&T has tried, Verizon has tried, but they don't have anything to sell. They have phones, and they have modems, and they have antennas, and they're really hoping that everybody will start doing SCADA on 5G cells, which will work just great until the bandwidth all dries up. And even with 5G, it's going to dry up in 5 to 7 years. And there's going to be a lot of places, especially where plants are located, where they don't have 5G. I don't know. The last time I was in Anacortes, I didn't see any 5G on my phone. And that big refinery there would want to be converted to 5G if the phone companies have their way.
Yeah.
No, I think what's going to happen really is the younger people, the younger engineers are going to say, stop it. We don't need to do it that way. We can do it this way. And they can look at radically changing how we do things. And we'll see what happens. Somebody else got a question? I've scared y'all off, huh?
No.
Okay.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. I gotta run. See ya.
Okay,
All right,
thanks,
Ed, take care.
Thank you very much.
If there aren't any more questions, then I'm going to stop the recording and go home. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
This is the first time in 20-something years I've been to a Seattle section meeting. I'm delighted to have done it. Somehow I've got to convince ISA that I really do live up here, and they really should put me back in Seattle section. They keep keeping me in the St. Louis section, and I haven't lived in St. Louis for almost 4 years now. Oh well, we'll see what happens. All right.
There's a way to change that in your ISA Connect.
Yeah, I've tried that, Brian.